go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma and the highest assembly, from the virtuous merit that I collect by practicing giving and the other perfections. May I attain the state of a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma and the highest assembly, from the virtuous merit that I collect by practicing giving and the other perfections. May I attain the state of a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma and the highest assembly, from the virtuous merit that I collect by practicing giving and the other perfections. May I attain the state of a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. So, welcome to Tara Institute, or welcome back to Tara Institute. My name's Damien, and I'm leading this month's Monday nights. And my topic is a presentation of, a certain logic about why, extending from oneself to the idea of benefiting others. So it's basically a sort of trying to be a logical presentation that we can then rely on. If we can grasp the logic and sort of have a familiarization with the logic, we can then use that as a way to overcome our sort of negativities or our harmful actions, etc. So this originally started off introducing this as the idea of making New Year's resolutions. And the resolution being, that this year to be a better person. So really we're looking for what does it mean to be a better person and how to actually become a better person. So we can also make the resolution every day that I want to be happy and I want to be free from suffering. So this is something that if we investigate, we can see that wish, the wish to be happy and the wish to be free from suffering, is really an innate or a natural wish. And so that's something really important to reinforce to yourself, that you have this natural wish, merely from existing, merely from being a person, that there's this very natural, very deep-seated, innate wish to be happy and to be free from suffering. And that it's quite reasonable to acknowledge that every action that you've done in your life has been motivated by that wish to be happy and the wish to be free from suffering. So it's really beneficial to sort of think about life in that way, because then, everything, whether we've got an education, whatever relationships, the start of a relationship, the ending of a relationship, the starting of a job, the ending of a job, everywhere we live, what we eat, what we watch on TV, that underlying all of that is this wish to be happy and a wish to be free from suffering. So it's something to recognise, and it's worth to consider. So we can say that individually I have my whole life tried to be happy and tried to be free from suffering. So the statement that I made last week was that, if we take that natural wish and we extend that thought, that wish to others, so we extend that wish for happiness and the wish to be free from suffering, if we extend that wish to others, so as Geshe Doga said, that it's reasonable to think of that as the essence of all of the Buddha's teachings. So the essence of all of the Buddha's teachings is the extension of our natural wish to be happy and to be free from suffering, but to have that wish for others. So that's something to consider and investigate. You know, particularly if you've done a lot of reading of Buddhist books and that sort of statement is not readily made in any of the books. So it's quite an interesting insight to consider whether that's true or not. So I want to be happy. I want to be free from suffering. Where does my happiness come from? So in our own life experience, we can investigate. You know, say, you know, what right now is my state of mind, is my experience? Is it a happy one? Is it an unhappy one? Is it neutral? And whatever it is, what is the cause? What is the cause for that experience? So initially we might struggle to identify the cause, but if we go through our life, we can sort of have a couple of baskets. We can say, well, in general, this type collection here, I can see has generated a happy mind. And this collection here, I can see has generated an unhappy mind. So the point of all this is that we can ask ourselves the question, is my experience something that is just random, you know, that I have no control over, no influence over, that there is no sense to any part of life whatsoever other than a collection of random experiences? Or is there an underlying cause for all of our experience, or a collection of causes, a multitude of causes? So certainly from the Buddhist point of view, and I think an investigation of our own experience, we can see that there is a causal and effect relationship for our experience. That it can become quite clear to see that you know, if we embrace strong anger, if we have that introspection that can look in and see in that moment of anger, what is my experience in that moment of anger, we can see very clearly that that experience is a very disturbed and unhappy experience. We can see that jealousy, for instance, is a very disturbed and unhappy experience. We can see that the real love and affection for somebody is a very joyful and happy experience. You know, the real human closeness to somebody, the real affection for a child or the affection for a parent or something like that, it's a very happy experience. You know, the ability to help somebody else, or the really peaceful mind, you know, having a very peaceful state, we can see how that is a happy experience. So we can start to analyse and get some insight into our own experience. So then we should try to convince ourselves that there is some sense to the world and that there is a cause and effect that operates, you know, that there is a cause and effect that operates. And so that in the same way, if I want to walk through that door, first of all, I have to have the thought to walk through the door. I have the thought to walk through the door, and then I have the sort of the development of that thought and the recognition that by getting up and walking, that I can pass through the door. So it seems like a really simple and naive example, but the point of that example is that there is actually a cause and effect sequence for me to walk through the door, and that I understand that sequence. So in the same way, my happiness and my misery is established by a cause and effect sequence. And we can investigate that from our own experience in our life. So we develop some real sort of belief or some real reliance that there is a cause and effect sequence for my own happiness. You know, that if I know that if I put myself into a very argumentative and difficult situation, that the consequence there is that I will react to these other people with anger and with resentment, and that as a consequence of that I will feel really unhappy and disturbed. So we can then enter a plan of action that we can avoid that circumstance, or if we are in that circumstance, we can protect our mind and not go down that particular path. So we can start to sort of have this strategy of, discrimination about what is beneficial and what is harmful. So that quality of discrimination is, from a Buddhist point of view, is said to be a particular human characteristic. It's the sort of the real benefit of being a human is that we have this intelligent discrimination, and we can develop this intelligent discrimination that can determine a difference between what is harmful and what is beneficial for myself. So that's an important characteristic of being human. So we go through this sort of sequence here, and we can start to see for ourselves that there is a whole collection of behaviours or attitudes and actions that produce within myself happiness, and then there's a whole collection of actions and attitudes, prejudices, beliefs, that can produce within myself a suffering experience or a miserable experience. Okay, so we can determine that there is a pathway then for happiness for myself. So we might then think that it's all about myself. It's, the only thing that really matters then is myself. So the sort of the particular teaching of the Buddha here is that, when we start to really see that my happiness, an actual experience of happiness for me, that we can say that there is the object. It could be another person, it could be a possession, it could be some situation, some fame, some praise that somebody's giving you, or some particular situation, and we're calling that a happy situation. And I experience happiness. So we tend to believe that it's that person who is making me happy. It is that possession, that food, that drink, that drug, that TV show, that circumstance, that beautiful scenery, my house, my car, my friend, my dog. We think that is what is making me happy. So the point here is to recognise that although there are all these external things, the actual thing that is making me happy is my happy state of mind. So it's actually for me to have the experience of happiness, I am actually experiencing my happy state of mind. So although these objects, we attribute that these objects, all these circumstances are the cause of happiness, we have to see this relationship. There's this object, there is my mental apprehension of that object, and then I experience the state of mind that is generated. So we think that it is the external that is producing our happiness, but we ignore this little step in the middle, which is our mental apprehension of that external object and our mental processing and the generation of a happy state of mind. And on the basis of that happy state of mind, I am happy. Okay, so that's a very important situation, and we touched on this a little bit last week in some of the questions. So the the person having a lot of difficulty with somebody at work who was, potentially that person is abusive or arrogant to you and causes great difficulties, and etc. So the question was, right now, when you are here and that person is, in Turak or wherever they live, wherever they are, right now, are you having that experience? And the answer is no. I'm not having that experience because that person is not in my mind. So the chances are that that person is the same when they go home as when they are at work. Most likely they're the same. So you can't say that I am unhappy because of that person. So this is a very important point to recognise, that I am either happy or unhappy due to my mental attention on that object having those particular characteristics. And because of my absorption into that object, the state of mind that I generate is related to the object held by my mind. So my mind and the object held by my mind have this relationship. But my happiness and my misery is actually dependent on my mind, on the state of my mind. So if we really embrace that idea, we can see that there's the potential for a great freedom if we can really accept and work from the basis of what state of mind do I have. So in any circumstance, if I can see that this object with these characteristics, if I focus on that object and those characteristics, and I let that sort of absorption of my mind into the object and the absorption of that object perception into my mind, and then my state of mind becomes formed by that absorption, then I will have no freedom as to what experience I'll have, because it will be dictated to me by that process, that absorption of my mind into the object. So, this is something to really recognise, that the opportunity we have in terms of determining happiness or misery relates to our ability to form our own state of mind. So, at the moment, we think that the external sort of absolutely dictates our experience. So we think, I need more wealth. I need more wealth. If I have more wealth, I will be happy. If I have more money, I will be happy. If I have a bigger house, a better car, whatever, everything that we are constantly sort of bombarded with through advertising and television shows, everything, what our friends tell us, what we think ourselves, externally driven. So we need to convince ourselves that if I really think that wealth is the cause for happiness, then anybody who's wealthy should be happy. And we already know, we can see very easily that wealth is not a ticket to happiness. So we can then return to this idea of the mind and the object that it perceives. And we can see that even though, particularly here in Australia, relative to the rest of the world, we have everything we need. We have everything we need. So, but our standards, our desires and aspirations keep climbing beyond what the reality is, and so we become unsatisfied. We feel really unsatisfied, unfulfilled. So there's something to sort of see there about how we become dominated by the external, but we're not seeing the role of our state of mind. Anyway, so the point of all this is, if we can convince ourselves that our state of mind is the key. What is my mind absorbed into? What is it focusing on? What object is it holding? Because whatever that object is that my mind is holding, then my state of mind, my experience, will be formulated by that relationship between my mind and the object. Okay, so we start to think, all right, so what I need to do is really control my actions, produce only happy situations, but I don't care about anybody else. So the reason that we extend that wish for happiness and the wish to be free from suffering to others is because in our relationship with others, for me, if I dislike somebody, then that dislike leads to a wish that they have some harm. Maybe just a little bit of humiliation or a little bit of, they didn't get the parking spot. Good on them, or the tea bags just ran out when they went for a cup of tea, and so, gee, that's good. That's what luck is that? We actually play these games with other people all the time, where we rejoice in somebody having this little bit of suffering. So the underlying aspect of that is that there's a wish to harm. The dislike for somebody involves maybe subtle, maybe very pronounced, but a wish to harm. And so from that wish to harm, that grows to a sort of like an active thought to harm, and then from that active thought to harm becomes an actual action to harm. And so we might insult somebody, or we might gossip about them behind their back. We might criticise them to the boss, or we might be obnoxious, or we might undermine them. We might do all sorts of things. But to see that it actually stems from a wish to harm, subtle or pronounced, but there's this wish to harm. So the point to understand here is that we go back to our own absolute conviction in cause and effect. If we go back to our absolute... Could somebody find Malcolm a chair? So we go back to that conviction that my state of mind and the object, the way I perceive it and all that this is the dictator of my experience. This is what formulates my experience. So the point that we have to jump to is the recognition that my attitude to others is included in that same process. So we might think that I am stridently working for my own happiness and my own freedom from misery, but somehow we think it's okay to slag off other countries, other people, other races, other social groups, different types of animals, different types of insects, that it's okay to just kill a whole bunch of creatures for no particular reason. But we don't recognise that in that action, within myself, is this wish to harm. The lack of affection, the wish to harm, and that wish to harm then translates into some action. So, it's sort of like a bit of a paradox in a way, that we convince ourselves in relation to my own agenda that, I want to be happy, I want to be free from suffering, and I've heard this sort of explanation about the state of mind and for my happiness, and I really embrace that thought, but somehow we draw the line when it comes to others. And so what we're doing is we're failing to see that same process, when we generate a disrespect, an arrogance, a total indifference to others, that we just completely wash our hands of any concern or thought for others, and so we have this sort of maybe underlying sort of wish that they go away and that they just, I don't care what happens to them, but whatever happens to them, don't let it be in my face. Like that sort of just disregard for others. And we don't recognise that that thought is actually harming my own happiness. So this is sort of one of the key sort of teachings of the Buddha, is this idea that when I benefit others, I benefit myself. When I harm others, I harm myself. So to understand the logic of how is that possible? Because the reality is we are constantly harming others. In driving into traffic, all these sort of things, we have this, you can feel the disregard that we have to others, and we rejoice in that disregard that we have for others. People will rejoice in their jumping the queue or cutting in front, going through red lights, whatever, So we actually have this sort of, we got this real clash of philosophies here. Yeah, I want to look after myself. I'm making a New Year's resolution to be a better person, to be a happier person, to be completely free of all suffering. And I hope that, what's a suitable example, We'll build a wall. We'll build a wall and we'll keep everybody nasty out. To see, so individually for us to see that the thought, if I have the thought to harm others, I harm myself. If I have the thought to benefit others, I benefit myself. And so this is a very important point. So let's say we accept that logic. Let's say we go through that logic and we meditate on it. We meditate and we see some connection between cause and effect for my own experience. And so then I make a resolve to practice what's called the practice of karma. Having a complete conviction that if I practice virtue, that the result for me will be happiness. And if I practice non-virtue, the result for me will be misery. So if I then, the practice of karma is engaging in the practice of virtue and abandoning the practice of non-virtue. All right? So let's say I have a complete conviction there. So then we start to think, why is it so difficult? The reality is this logic is pretty straightforward, and our natural inclination to be happy and to be free from suffering is something which is readily obvious to us. So why is it so difficult? And so this is where we then enter the realm of understanding our various types of ignorance and our various types of the lack of wisdom. So, we have to admit that at the moment for myself, I think anger's great. I think that lust is great. I think that arrogance and pride and jealousy, that, I can see they're a bit disturbing, but I have an ignorance that somehow makes them seem great to me because I engage in them so readily. So that's where that although the idea of practicing virtue and avoiding non-virtue, everybody sort of said, oh yeah, killing, we shouldn't be killing, but the thing is there's still an awful lot of killing goes on. So to see that there is some problem within us that causes us to almost go against logic through a misbelief that we endorse as okay. We get angry at somebody, and we may even take great delight in what we've done to somebody. So there's, in Buddhist terminology, it's called a delusion. It's a delusion, an affliction, a delusion. That there is an underlying ignorance that somehow deceives us to think that anger is beneficial. There's a delusion or a deception that strong lust and attachment, craving lustful attachment, is a source of great happiness. Whereas in reality, if we can have the introspection to look at that, we can see that it's actually a very disturbing and a destroyer of our mental peace. So that's where, why it's described as a path, a progressive awakening of understanding why we engage in harmful behaviour to ourselves. Why do we do that? And we have to work to understand this underlying ignorance that causes us to misapprehend situations and to think that something is beneficial, and we keep striving to find that benefit. And if we are honest in looking at our life, we might see that we've engaged in anger for 50 years, and on the belief that it will produce peace, in the belief that if I can drive away all my enemies, I will have complete peace and happiness. But there is no peace and happiness. So that's something to understand, that method is a faulty method based on ignorance. That attachment, if I can surround myself with all of the things that appear beautiful to me and rewarding to me and everything, that on the basis of that I will find satisfaction. But the reality is it just creates more dissatisfaction, because they are basically unsatisfying because of the mind of grasping. It's the mind of grasping that renders the object unsatisfying. So if we can be free of the mind of grasping, then everything is satisfactory. And then I am satisfied. But the mind of grasping that thinks this other thing will be satisfying just continually is unsatisfied. That grasping mind, it cannot be satisfied. So therefore there is no satisfaction. So these are things to sort of contemplate and think about, and see that role of different types of ignorance or different types of misapprehension or misunderstanding that generate our suffering. So the solution is to develop some mental skills that we can understand, that, and then develop a mental power or a mental resilience that we are able to create our behaviour into ways that are beneficial for myself. And part of that is understanding how important the role of benefiting others and not harming others is in my own happiness. So for that we need to meditate and develop those mental skills. So our motivation for meditation is to really understand this whole circumstance of surrounding our life, and to see how it's in a large part due to my lack of awareness, my lack of mental strength, my lack of ability to focus and concentrate on what I want to, on what I choose. So my inability to focus on what I choose and instead I'm just constantly distracted to whatever object comes into my realm, my mind just irresistibly goes to that object. So that we need to be able to overcome that process so that I can choose what my mind focuses on. So for that reason, for that motivation, so we can use that motivation to meditate. So we'll do some meditation now. So sit comfortably and just become aware of where your mind is. And like bring your attention within yourself, like right inside your own body, like right within inside your own inner space or inner realm. And then let all of the thoughts in your mind drop away. Any past or future, outside, any thoughts, any fantasies, any sort of other agenda, just let them all drop away. And keep letting the thoughts drop away from your mind, and bring your mind into like a state of having no thought. And then turn your attention to just the breath coming and going. Just that awareness of coming and going. In and out of the breath, the movement of the breath, the awareness of the movement of the breath. And focus on that and have the determination for 100% focus on the breath. And we'll do this just for a very short time. Relax your concentration a little bit and just examine what happened in your meditation. Identify what happened, whether daydreaming or sleeping, whatever it was, or good meditation. And then we repeat exactly the same way. So generate a really strong determination that for the next 2 minutes that I will keep my focus completely on the breath. So just repeat the same meditation. So relax your concentration, and again examine what happened in your mind. Were you distracted, a little bit unsettled? So again, we'll do a very brief session, just repeat for a third time, but with a very strong determination to keep the focus 100% on the breath. And relax your concentration. So it's good to always examine your meditation, to check, like the intention is to have 100% focus, but we should admit to ourselves if that's not the case. So it's no particular benefit to sit and daydream for 20 minutes and then do that every day for 30 years. It's going to have very limited benefit. But even 1 minute of good focus will have a big benefit. And like one thing Geshe Doga has advised is you can do just 1 minute of meditation a day, and then next year you bump it up to 2 minutes, and then when you're comfortable with the 2 minutes, you put it up to 3 minutes, so that you're always ensuring a good quality meditation. So we've got some time for a bit of discussion or questions. So if anybody has anything? Yeah.
Bob Shuffle had spoken about, well, we'll talk about this in the healing book a fair bit, and to put it biologically, like he talks about the reptilian mind, part of which is the amygdala, our emotional responses. And then there's the frontal cortex, and I can understand. I'm trying to practice a virtuous mind. If I see someone that is suffering, but if I am driving along the road and a truck nearly runs me off the road, my reptilian mind is going kaboom, like explode, but my frontal cortex is trying to say, oh, isn't that a good truck for carrying all those goods along the road? And it's kind of, your, you see what I mean? Your primitive response and the frontal cortex. I mean, can you meditate that? Can meditation stop that primitive reptilian type of urge?
Yeah. So the question is about different aspects of maybe the relationship between our body and our mind. Now, Bob's a psychologist, so he will use terms that I will not use. So, but I think, one way we can understand this is the Buddha holds a bowl. In the statue here, you'll see that the Buddha's cradling a bowl. And that bowl is said to contain a nectar that overcomes the 4 demons that affect us. Right? Now, one of those demons that affects us is the demon of the aggregates, which is the demon of our physicality and our mentality. So whether you call it reptilian mind or whatever, like from Buddhist terminology, it's the effect of this physicality that I have acquired in this lifetime. So this physical body has all sorts of different impulses and environment, an environment that affects my mind. So, the various physicality sort of experiences that we have, they are due to this union of body and mind that I have in this life, in this form. So those influences are very hard to overcome. So that's why the Buddha described them as like a demon, the demon of the aggregates, the demon of our body. So, we can attribute a lot of our fight or flight type of response to some sort of physicality situation. And it would seem a lot of our lust in that we can attribute to a physicality. An interaction between our body and our mind. So, but still this logic still applies, especially in a long-term situation, that we have the ability to habituate our mind and our experience to a different experience by training and familiarization. Now, it won't happen overnight. And I've just been listening to some teachings by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and he's talking about different meditational practices, and he says, don't go looking for a change after 1 year or 3 years, but after 10 years of regular practice, you should be able to see some change in your mind. So, of course, when we are in the traffic and we feel threatened, or we're in the office and we feel threatened, or we're walking down the street and I see a beautiful girl, of course my natural habituated inclination is to, like, irresistible mentality that arises is so deeply habituated, it's going to take a lot of practice to overcome that. So deep-seated prejudices like racism or gender bias or, any sort of prejudice that, you see in the society, it can be very deep-seated, and it can take a lot of personal investigation, analysis, and application of the antidote to it to be able to reverse it. So when we have those experiences, we can use the Buddhist terminology and we can just think, that's the demon of the aggregates. That's the demon of lust, or the the demon of the delusions, you know, our habituation to anger, our habituation to jealousy that just arises so quickly without any, it seems, without any effort or any mental engagement, those habituated negativities arise, you know, and it seems like they come from somewhere else. Like as though it's not my fault, it's just, you know, it just happened, you know. So that is the demon of the delusion, or the, you know, the demon of the aggregates, or whatever. That you know, that's the language that is in the books. I'm not saying there's a whole bunch of demons out there, but you know, to understand, you know, it's portrayed as a demon because of the way it appears to influence us. You know, almost without, you know, without any involvement of myself. But the thing to understand is that it is my own mind that's doing it.
Seems to me though, you have to have the wisdom, knowledge to find the analytical means to get over your deluded mind. And if your mind's deluded, how can you use your wisdom, knowledge to analyse your mind?
You know, to quote Mao Zedong, even the longest journey starts with a single step. So that's what we have to do. Take one step. You know, one step in that direction, then another step. You know, of course it's not easy. Otherwise, you know, everybody would have been enlightened a long time ago if it was really easy. But we're not enlightened, so therefore, you know, it's not easy.
Acknowledging that anger already can help. This question from this lady, when she's in the car and she's really angry and wants to react with anger, and she is really angry and then acknowledge I'm angry, already that acknowledgement will help.
Yeah, so the observation is that the acknowledgement that you're angry in that circumstance can help. I think that acknowledgement can only help if you recognise that experience of anger is undesirable for yourself, that experience of anger is in itself a suffering that you have imposed on yourself. If you can have that approach, that can be really useful technique. Yeah. Whether it comes from the reptilian brain or your genes or your neurons or whatever, you know, it doesn't matter where it comes from, but you can recognise that it's undesirable for my own happiness, therefore it should be overcome. Yeah.
I'm just curious about the other three demons that the next group involved us to overcome. Or is that another one?
Well, I'll list them for you. So the demon of death, sometimes described as the demon of the Lord of Death, the demon of the delusions, the demon of the aggregates, and the demon, technically they call it the demon of the Son of God, but these days it's translated more as the demon of lust. But if you want to read about it, both explanations are interesting. So the demon of death is an interesting one because it's sort of saying that we are captivated by a lifespan that is limited, and so we have to face death. And so that technically is a bit of a problem, you know, because whatever good things we're doing or trying to do, unfortunately, become terminated by death. And so you need, you know, if we can somehow have a determination that whatever virtue that I'm practicing, that death will be insignificant to my practice. You know, that's the aspiration to have, that even though, like, normally we consider death as some sort of ultimate termination of this life, but if we can develop an aspiration that death is just like a 1 or 2 minute little inconvenience, and my determination to train my mind and to develop virtue will just continue on, if we can have that aspiration, then it sort of diminishes the power of death. Okay. Yeah. So, just I'm developing a little flow chart on this logic of this, which just sort of helps me present. But it's interesting that it's a logical flow. So normally we think that, you know, the great religions of the world, then they nearly all say much the same thing. But we tend to, when we hear Buddhism or we read about Buddhism or we think of all of the other religions, we have this sort of apprehension that they're telling me to practice love and compassion. You know, they're telling me to be generous. They're telling me to have patience and all that. So, you know, if we can embrace this sort of logic of this understanding, this link between my innate wish to be happy and to be free from suffering, and then we can see that my happiness and my suffering has a cause, and that cause produces a state of mind which then determines my experience, and that my attitudes to others similarly produces a state of mind which determines my happiness or my suffering. So if we can really embrace that logic, then we can extend it and we can see that generosity, patience, love, compassion, affection, humility, you know, all the good qualities, tolerance, you know, contentment, all of these good qualities, that they are actually naturally beneficial for myself. Even though I might appear to engage them in relation to others, but they are naturally beneficial to myself. And I think if we can embrace that logic, and so the way Geshe-Doga presents this, he says if we can embrace that logic and that, you know, that recognition, we can then see, you know, this logic, understanding and embracing this sort of logic within myself becomes like a great companion, a really true friend or a true companion, which can act as a guidance and a something that we can rely on absolutely. You know, so in a way, not seeing spirituality or religion as some external thing, but, you know, having this sort of self-generated determination and conviction based on good reason. And on the basis of that good reason, we can understand all virtuous behaviour and apply it. You know, from a self-motivated position. You know, and that's something to aspire to have that self-motivation, you know, through understanding. Yeah.
So, with the meditation on the breath, where are you actually focusing your mind in particular?
Yeah, so the question is about the meditation on the breath. Okay, so the way I present that, I don't know if you saw my emphasis on awareness, right? So often the way some people present the meditation on the breath, they'll tell you to focus, you know, like on the point on the lip, or to focus on the breath going in and going out, you know, physically following it, right? So that is a focus on a physicality, right, which is useful. You know, that can bring some settling, but ultimately all concentration meditation needs to have a mental object rather than a physical object. So when I present the breathing meditation in this way, ideally for the progression, that when you sort of understand more meditation, you can see that there's a difference between focusing on the physicality of the breath and trying to focus on the awareness, the mental awareness of the breathing. And that there's a difference between those two objects. One of them is entirely mental, and the other one is a physical experience. So the physical experience is subject to a whole lot of the physical condition. It's actually an external. So it's an external object, whereas the awareness ultimately is an internal object. And so when we try to develop deep states of concentration, we need a mental object for that process rather than a physical object. So that's why I sort of mention that aspect in the meditation. So for me, when I say about doing 1 minute at a time and this, I didn't do that when, 35 years ago when I started. So my meditation is not so good, right? So for me, when I try to find that mental object, for me, it's sort of like, I don't know how, I would call it a mental ebbing and flowing. It's sort of like my experience of it is that it's just a mental coming and going without specific physical characteristic.
It could be like in and out, the words in and out.
But not without verbalizing. But it's just an in and out. A movement in the mind, but without the physicality of the actual position or the place or the speed or the coldness, the warmth, which are all the physical experiences. And that's why if we meditate on the physical breath, we can become distracted by the nostril, the warmth, the speed, the physical characteristics become a distraction. So to strive to have a mental awareness, so whether I'm fabricating it or not, I'm not too sure. But for me, it's just like an ebb and flow, an in and out experience, mental experience. And I try to hold that as my object. Yeah?
Sorry about the last part you were saying. I know there are different kinds of meditation, but I was surprised about you saying that the physical sensations being external are not a good point of awareness?
Ultimately, initially, when we start off, looking at a crystal, a candle flame, the physical breath, all these things are useful.
But moreover, the physical sensation, probably I'm attached to another kind of meditation.
Yeah.
And that's why what Buddha was calling vijnana was the physical sensation, and he was staying on the physical sensation being any abstraction, any awareness, some kind of abstraction indeed, some kind of mental visualization, not so different from saying in and out while we are breathing, while the actual sensation on the nostrils, for example, is effective.
Yeah.
So just want to
Look, and in the Buddhist tradition, there's many. The Vipassana technique, all of that is about the physical sensations. There's many different meditations. But the point that I'm making here, that for the development of what's called calm abiding, single point concentration, in the end, you must have a mental object, not a physical object. And so it doesn't deny the value of, if you at home, people focus on a crystal or a candle, an image of the Buddha, all these sort of things. So the instruction, for instance, if you're meditating on an image of the Buddha, you start off looking, you might put a small statue. The instruction is that you put a small image, a painting or a statue, about 2 meters away, so that the object is very small, and you really look at it, and you establish it as a known object, something that you know very intimately, but then you meditate on the mental memory of it. So you progress from the eye, the visible object, you progress to the mental object, the mental image of it. And you focus on the sort of the mental memory of it, rather than the physical object. And that's what you then try to develop your concentration on the basis of that mental object. Okay, so I guess I'm trying to hint at that process even here for beginners. You know, if it's the first time you're meditating, I'm hopeful that if I even mention that, it might in the future be something that you're able to do. You know. But yeah, look, there's many meditations, and a lot of them are that, you know, the analysis of the scanning of your body, every aspect of your physicality is focused on. But to develop calm abiding, it's said that the object you require is a mental object, a more subtle object. So.
Can be a mantra as
Well,
well.
with the mantra, you know, the mantra's got many syllables. So you're moving, the mind is moving around them. It's possible, but to understand that movement of the mind is a movement. It's not a single. So.
Damien then is on a good mantra because it's only one syllable.
You know, the ideas of meditating on mantras, I say one thing. In those meditations on mantras, there's a practice of initially where you meditate on the sounds, you know, on the actual sound of the mantra, and then you progress to like a mental appearance of the mantra, but without the sound. So, you know, I think the same practice occurs with that movement, you know, ultimately with the movement just to a mental object. But look, they're good objects. They're good objects to meditate on. So.
I'm struggling.
Look, it's not an easy subject.
The physicality of the breathing, I think I'm a bit more confused. I can understand the thoughts and try to focus and get the garbage out, stop all this scattered stuff by focusing on the breath. And then it seems you're saying there's another dimension which is the mental.
Yeah.
That can be achieved by focusing on thoughts.
Yeah. Something along those lines, yeah.
So you can use anything you like to just stabilise to get it going.
Yeah, look, you know, it's obviously a subject that not everybody is that keen on. So, and it's a complex subject, but I think if we just stick with the explanation about the breathing meditation, and we can understand that movement from the physicality to a mental, we can see that there's a difference. You know, that's something to understand. And so in my meditating on the breath, I try to have this sort of mental awareness and try to hold that. And for me, that experience is sort of, I don't know, it's sort of like just a mental movement in and out in conjunction with the physical breathing. You know, like there's an awareness. You know, if I look at the light and close my eyes, I can still see the light in my memory. You know, like memory. You know, if I think MCG, if I say to myself MCG, I can see the MCG in my mind. I have an object. Now that object is not the MCG. It is merely a mental object. So I can focus on the MCG in my mind, that mental object. But I'm not focusing on the MCG. I'm focusing on that mental object. It's only a mental object. It's not the MCG. So the same with the breath. There's the physical breath movement. In the same moment, my mind is aware of the breath and it's generating a mental image of the breath at that moment. And so in the meditation we try to focus on that mental image of the breath. So in the same way that when I say MCG, we have a mental image of the MCG, when I'm actually looking at the MCG, at that very moment there is also a mental image of the MCG. And what I experience is actually more to do with the mental image of the MCG than the actual MCG. You know, that's something to understand about the way we realise an object, the way we understand an object is because of the role of this mental image and the way that we perceive something. So when I see my enemy, I am not directly seeing all of the characteristics, the actual characteristics of that person. Rather, what I'm experiencing is a whole bunch of projected, imaginary, false characteristics that I have superimposed onto that enemy due to my anger. Right? So, and what I'm experiencing is my mental image of that person, and it's completely disconnected to the reality of that person. You know, there might be some relativity, but to really see and understand that it's my fantasizing and projection that actually creates the enemy that I react to. So these are sort of some of the things to understand about our experience. You know, we do not see the world the way that it is. We do not see any other person the way that they actually are. We have a whole mixture of embellishments, exaggerations, diminishings, fantasies, projections, fabrications, and so we end up with an attitude to somebody which is actually unrealistic. You know, and what we experience are these mental images. And we react to these fabricated mental images and generate anger and jealousy and lust and all that. And then at some point we discover that we were completely wrong. You know, especially with things like lust and attachment, you know, we so embellish the object, and it doesn't possess any of those characteristics in the way that we exaggerate and embellish them. So to understand that, and so the breathing meditation is in a way working on that aspect of the mind, the way the mind works like that. So, okay, let's do a very quick dedication, and I'd like to include in the dedication somebody that many of you know very well, and that's Claire Callanan, who's been one of the regular Monday night teachers here. So today she had a major operation. I haven't heard how it's gone, but so she's quite sick, but apparently the doctors are all pretty optimistic. So she's been teaching here Monday nights for maybe a good 20 years or something. So many of you would know her. So we can include her in the dedication. So let's imagine that all of the virtue or the benefit of us coming together tonight takes the form of white light in the centre of the room and bring it above your own head and let it sort of pour down into you so that you become completely filled with all of the benefit or the merits of the meditation discussion and work that everybody has done here tonight. So it completely fills you, and your mind is completely clear, and your body completely clear. And so this virtue, merit, takes the form of like a light, an egg, and a big egg at your heart of light. And you feel completely at peace, completely free of all negativities, and that all good qualities and peace and clarity are fully developed within yourself. So enjoy that experience. And then thinking of everybody else here in the room that was here tonight, think that they all want happiness and want to be free from suffering, but in fact they lack happiness and they have suffering. So imagining the rays of light going out from yourself, and they all become established in happiness and a freedom from suffering. And to your family, and we can include here Claire, that the light goes out from yourself to all your close ones and to others in need of help, and so the light enters their bodies completely clear, become completely clear, and their minds completely joyful and free of all negativity, free of all delusion and afflictions. So all their physical and mental suffering is completely gone. And like this to every living being. So in front of you imagine this like a vast ocean of living beings, all in human form, undergoing great variety of sufferings. And imagine the rays of light go out to every living being and establishes every single one of them in happiness, in freedom from misery. And as you do this, develop a great delight. And then imagine all those rays of light dissolve back into yourself. So thank you very much. Next week I will continue on.